House of the Dragon Season 2 so far has left me feeling slightly puzzled. I am enjoying it a lot and think in terms of the acting and production, it is a step up from Season 1. The writing for me has been on par from what we could have expected from Season 1. Not quite Game of Thrones at its peak, but miles better than Game of Thrones at its worst. But here's the thing, despite all the good in every episode so far, there has been one or two baffling choices made that truly left me scratching my head as to the thought process behind them. While these moments don't ruin my enjoyment of the show, they do for me prevent it from reaching its full potential. Now before I get into this review proper, there is an issue I want to address that has been bugging me since Season 1. I am of course a book fan first and foremost, but given my background in screenwriting, specifically adaptation, I'm well aware Fire and Blood was always going to be a difficult book to adapt, and changes to its structure were going to be needed to make a successful TV show. The Dance of the Dragons in the show was always going to be different from the books. For the most part, I try and embrace the changes as long as they make sense within the context of the story and are not just changes for the sake of change. But I will call the show out when I think it's been handled badly. It is possible to have a discussion about the book versus the show without it becoming toxic from both sides of the argument. Ever since Season 1, there's kind of been this false narrative spread around that the events as seen in House of the Dragon is in fact the true telling of the Dance of the Dragons in both the show and the books, when many people, even in my own comment section, claiming that the changes made to the show are canon to the books. This is simply not the case. The show is the show, the book is the book, as it always has been. Now, there are a few places where the show has done something that George R. R. Martin has personally confirmed was his intent in Fire and Blood that fits in with the books, such as the inclusion of Aegon's prophecy being the reason for the conquest. But in most cases, when the show does something different, it's not a real indicator in terms of the books. This argument has become quite toxic. There is definitely some elitism in some parts of the community, but at the same time there's a lot of show fans who needlessly attack fans of the book who don't like it when changes are made. It's all gotten a bit silly, to the point I hardly check Twitter or Reddit anymore, because of how toxic it's become. From what I can tell, this narrative that the show is canon to the books and the real Dance of the Dragons dates back to the press and promo from Season 1, where Ryan Condal and George R. R. Martin were misquoted in several articles implying the show was canon to the book. When you actually dig into the original source of these claims, not once has George R. R. Martin ever claimed the show is canon to the story in the book. In fact, in an in-depth interview he did with the History of Westeros podcast, he makes it abundantly clear the show is the show, the book is the book. They are their own worlds. The show is still a true telling of the Dance of the Dragons. It's telling the objective true versions of events that happened in the world of the show, but it's not Fire and Blood's true telling. A true telling I don't think we're ever likely going to see. The show and the book are two completely different things. In fact, there is one interview with Ryan Condal in Screen Rant, where he says that as fun as the conflicting style and storytelling is in Fire and Blood, they left that to the book and decided to instead try and define what they thought the objective truth of the actual history was. There is a lot of indication that George R. R. Martin himself doesn't even know yet what his true telling of the dance is, and its elements he's not even fully decided. So while the show does make changes he publicly likes and agrees to, it doesn't mean it forms part of his true telling from the books. Because at the end of the day, the show is the show, the book is the book. So why have I just gone on this tangent in this review of Season 2 Episode 3? Well, it's important when it comes to how I feel about House of the Dragon Season 2, and specifically this episode in general, and changes they made from the book, and the impact they have on the story. The Battle of the Burning Mill is one of my favourite small battles from the Dance of the Dragons, with it being a proxy war between House Blackwood and House Bracken. The build-up scene sums up perfectly Princess Rhaenys' fears that as young blood runs hot, war is inevitable. This is exactly what that small scuffle between Aeron Bracken and Davos Blackwood shows us. This minor event turned into a bloody battle with hundreds dead. Was I disappointed we never got to see the battle? Yes, kind of. I would have loved to have seen Black Aly with her bow and some of the other named characters. But when you sit back, them suddenly cutting to the bloody aftermath like that was very impactful at getting the message across without spending huge amounts of the show's budget on what should be a small battle. From the amount of dead, the battle seems a lot bigger than I pictured, maybe 100 or 200 people each side, while the battle in the show was something much more bloody. I do understand why some fans are disappointed we didn't get to see the actual battle. I would have liked to have seen it myself, but practically, I think they did the best they could with the resources they had. I really liked the scenes of Criston Cole in this episode. Specifically, I like the little one in his chambers, because for Cole to have been made Hand of the King was a huge leap in his station, and I kind of get the vibe that he seems a little overwhelmed by the situation, and this drive he has now to prove himself worthy of the role, which may explain why he's happy to placate Aegon's need for war. He arrives at the council meeting late, which to me really indicates this uncertainty within him. What I really enjoyed about this meeting was the underlying tension in the room, as the small council adjusted to this new reality of Cole as Hand of the King, testing and pushing his boundaries slightly. You even had the likes of Alicent, in a way, directly calling out the absence of her father. While I don't like the relationship between Alicent and Cole, and how it's been handled thus far, I do like the sense of conflict within Alicent here, wherein she's clearly unhappy her father is gone, while at the same time not completely blaming Cole for the position he now finds himself in. It's very clear at this point that Aegon is set out for war, come what may, which I think with all that's happened thus far was now inevitable. His keenness to ride into battle with Sunfire, while courageous and fueled by fear of not being accepted as king, to me sets the stage perfectly for Rook's Rest, where perhaps Aegon's eagerness for battle may play a factor in how events play out in the show. A little moment I did pick up on is how when Cole tells Aemond he and Vhagar were to stay behind in King's Landing to defend it, Aemond accepts this with no argument or outrage, like he would have done if Otto or Alicent had asked this of him. It's clear that Cole and Aemond have been planning this war for a while, but I think there's more to it than simply that. I think this little moment shows the respect Aemond has for Cole, with him being this father-like figure throughout his childhood. I think if anyone else was in Cole's place, Aemond reacts very differently. I suspect this may play a role, not just this season, but into Season 3 as well. The scenes of Mysaria and Rhaenyra talking about Seasmoke also stood out to me a great deal. We have wondered how they were going to address Laenor being alive in show canon, and how Addam of Hull will be able to bond with Seasmoke. I think this scene is laying the groundwork for that. Rhaenyra says Seasmoke has been acting strange of late, and was perhaps lonely. My theory is Seasmoke is now acting like this as Laenor has died somewhere in Essos. Rhaenyra will realise this when Addam is able to claim Seasmoke. What I loved about Daemon's arrival at Harrenhal is it truly got the scale of the castle across in a way I don't think Game of Thrones ever managed to do. I think at the time they didn't really have the budget to do it right, but it does make me wonder how different Game of Thrones would have been with House of the Dragon's budget from the get-go. They did a really good job at getting across the spooky cursed vibes of Harrenhal, from the lightning to Daemon's slight trepidation as he turned around each corner. A detail I loved is how you can see the roots of the weirwood tree stretching throughout the castle. It really gives an insight into how important this specific tree is, and given how much emphasis is put on it, makes me wonder if we will get Addam of Hull's Isla Faces arc, or maybe a huge lore drop from Alys Rivers at some point. Matt Smith's acting once again elevated a fairly simple dinner scene to something very entertaining to watch. I love how happy Simon Strong was to hand over Harrenhal and bend the knee, and for all of Larys Strong's apparent skill in subversion, in this case his actions in killing his father and brother were so bold it really pointed the finger at himself. Interestingly, we get the groundwork for the politics in the Riverlands during this dinner, and I suspect Daemon will be dealing with this over the next few episodes. It seems he will be spending much more time dealing with the Riverlands houses than he does in the books, even if he took no part in the taking of Stonehenge as in the books. But I guess they could still do this, albeit with a different context. Now, something that I found quite interesting is Daemon's insistence on being called Your Grace. It shows how he's taking his King Consort title very literally, in a way I suspect he might not get away with on Dragonstone. I think he's insisting on this petty act of vanity as a way in his own mind of getting one over on Rhaenyra, with him slightly bitter and resentful for being sent away from court. It's his own minor act of rebellion. On a side note, it is wonderful to finally see Alys Rivers. She's one of my favourite minor characters from the dance, and I hope we get some answers into her true nature in the show. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about the introduction of Gwayne Hightower. I think he's been added in to simply be a foil to Criston Cole during the march on the castles of the Crownlands, the attack on Duskendale, and then Rook's Rest. It gives Cole someone to talk to in place of, say, Aemond being there. So I do kind of get why he was included. The scene in itself is interesting. We get this moment between Alicent and Cole, wherein he asks for her favour, which she does give to him, also saying that she will pray for him. Now, I've been vocal about my dislike of the relationship between Alicent and Cole. Not that it's actually happened, but how the writers chose to introduce it with 3 sex scenes, one of which impacts the story in a big way. Little moments like this between them I do actually quite like, and wish we'd gotten more of, rather than those sex scenes. The relationship is very hard to read, and this scene sums it up perfectly. Is there any affection or love in it? Or is it simply a physical thing? I suspect a little from column A and a little from column B, but I do think this could mirror Cole and Rhaenyra's relationship somewhat, wherein Cole feels and sees more in the relationship than Alicent does. It's needless drama, but I don't hate it if it's being done in this way. There is a nugget of a good story in there somewhere. They just fumbled the setup so badly. Now, I found the scenes on Dragonstone with Rhaenyra and Rhaenys meeting with the small council, trying to prevent the war escalating further, very interesting. One of the biggest issues they were always going to have with Rhaenyra, specifically this season, during the actual war, is she seemingly does very little. How they were going to bring that to screen, but also make her character an active participant, without drastically changing the story, was also going to be challenging. In the books during this time, Rhaenyra is still not even attending her own small council sessions, with it mostly being led by Jacaerys and Corlys. It seems they have partly given Rhaenyra Jace's role during this time on Dragonstone, which to me kinda makes sense in a lot of ways. While Rhaenyra is still sat on Dragonstone trying to prevent war, by making her involved with the small council and the plans toward her children in the Vale and Pentos, it makes her a much more active part of the story without drastically changing the overarching plot. Having Rhaenys be her biggest advocate for the anti-war position is also a really good move by the writers. We all know as viewers that by this point it's too late, but I think with Rhaenys being such a key part of Rhaenyra's support, Brooke's rest next week will be the first point of weakness we will see in Rhaenyra's mentality that will escalate and crack over time to the point it does by the end of the war. I know people worry they won't go down that road with her character, but I don't really think people need to worry about it. While they are taking their time laying the groundwork, Rhaenyra slowly becoming broken down by the war as her mental state fragments, and the fight within her slowly erodes after each and every loss, is fundamentally a key part of her story and tragedy. Now, there's a lot of people who have pointed out that it seems odd that Rhaenys is invoking Jacaerys the Conciliator and Rhaenyra wearing his crown, giving her personal history of being passed over by Jacaerys. But there is 2 key things to remember here. As in season 1, she makes it very clear she made her peace with the issue a long time ago, but also at the end of the day, she's trying to help and protect Rhaenyra in this situation. Invoking Jacaerys in such a way, even if she did personally have issue with him, does make sense in the context of the situation. We get this nice little scene between Rhaenys and Corlys on Driftmark, talking about the situation regarding the heir to Driftmark being Joffrey or Rhaenyra. It's a nice little moment between the two, and I think it's going to be vital after the events of next week transpire. But this scene does serve a very important purpose in setting up Dragonseed arc, specifically the idea that Addam and Alyn being the bastard sons of Corlys, and why he's dancing around the issue of the heir to Driftmark with Rhaenys here. I suspect he's already playing with the idea of naming Addam or Alyn his heir, regardless at this point. His comments about neither Joffrey or Rhaenyra knowing the sea really speaks to this. Plus, during the few scenes we've had with Alyn thus far, they've gone out of their way to show him as an experienced sailor, something that would of course appeal to Corlys. I don't really have much to say about the scene where Joffrey, Aegon and Viserys are sent with Rhaenyra to the Vale. Again, it's a really well acted scene, and you can start to see the shades of the character Rhaenyra will develop into in later seasons, with her sheer sadness at sending her boys away. I know people are frustrated and are worried they will not take the character in that direction, but I can already see them starting to lay the groundwork for her descent. One of the biggest issues people had with the ending of Game of Thrones was Daenerys' fall to madness happened so suddenly, and I think the writers are all too aware of this, and they are being careful how they handle that part of Rhaenyra's story to ensure they don't make that same mistake again. Now, the dragon eggs. This has upset a lot of book fans, with the implication these are the ones that will hatch Daenerys' dragons in the main show. Well, I'm not exactly thrilled with this. I love the whole Alyssa Farman stealing Dreamfire's eggs from Rhaenyra's story, selling them and sailing around the world. I guess we're not really likely to ever see that story told on TV, so I can kind of understand the writers wanting to make them Syrax's eggs, the ones that become Daenerys's. Even if in Season 1 they went out of their way to make Dreamfire look exactly like Drogon. Yes, so I don't really love it if I'm being honest. But as I pointed out at the start of this video, the show is the show and the book is the book. If they want to make them Dany's eggs in the show, fine. It doesn't change the book. We had the director of the episode confirm they were intended to be Daenerys' eggs. The thing people need to remember is that not once in the show itself did they ever indicate this in any way other than the colour of the eggs. And while it may have been the intent of the production for them to be Dany's eggs, there is nothing in the show itself to actively state that. So if like me you don't love it, just ignore it unless at some point it's confirmed on the show. And anyway, if they do ever adapt Alyssa Farman, the way they've done it in the show so far means they can just easily retcon it. People have gotten really worked up about this on both sides of the argument, and it's gotten really toxic. And while I can understand both points of view, at the end of the day, I think it was just supposed to be a harmless Easter egg, and nothing that deep or important. But I guess time will tell. I think the scene between Helaena and Alicent really highlights how different Helaena as a character is from the book. It's a very different take on her character in the sense that by this point in the story, in the book, she is very traumatized and broken, to the point Jaehaera is taken away from her, where here in the show, she's objectively looking at the situation very differently to how many characters would, in the sense she feels that as a highborn lady, she doesn't have as much of a right to grieve the loss of her child as much as, say, the small folk who suffer more. We also have this moment where she minimises Jaehaerys' death somewhat, as simply a child dying rather than being brutally murdered in front of her. She's coping with his death by disassociating from the situation and turning it into something else. She says how small babes are and die easily all the time. It really gives us an insight into how her mind is working. Like Rhaenyra's descent into depression, I do wonder, given how different Helaena is in the show, how they will choose to play it, given that as of now she seems to be dealing with the situation in a fairly decent manner. Giving Aegon Valyrian steel armour is an interesting choice, but I think they may have done it for a very specific reason. After Rook's Rest, Aegon is of course very badly burned, with his armour melting into his flesh. I think they've chosen to give him Valyrian steel armour so he can still end up burned and injured after Rook's Rest, but perhaps not to the extent he's hurt in the books, thus meaning they won't have to cover Tom Glencarny in copious amounts of prosthetics and makeup. The Valyrian steel will protect Aegon from the bulk of the burns, but injure him just enough to take him out of the war in a meaningful way. We get an introduction to Ulf White, another of the Dragon Seeds, who made a brief appearance in last week's episode. He seems to be well known around the wine sinks of King's Landing. Now in the show, he's claiming to be the bastard son of Balon the Brave, and thus the half-brother to Viserys and Daemon. It's actually been a really popular fan theory for a long time that one of the Dragon Seeds was a bastard of Balon, and is not something that I'm actually that mad about. In fact, when it comes to Ulf's turn at Tumbleton, given who he believes his father is, it does kinda make sense. But there is also a lot of speculation that he's not really Balon's son, but rather Serra Targaryen, and him claiming the descent from Balon, given the shame related to Serra Targaryen's actions that resulted in her exile. Whatever the truth may be, I'm interested in finding out more about Ulf, and also see if there's any clues to who Hugh's Hammer father is. In fact, I always believed in the fan theory that Hugh was actually the bastard of Balon, given I feel it just fits his character better, and his look on the show is kind of how I pictured Balon. But let us see how it plays out. The scene in the brothel between Aemond and Aegon seemed very odd to me and really highlighted my issue with the writing in these first 3 episodes, namely how inconsistent Aegon seems to be as a character this season. They spent much of episode 1 trying to show Aegon's more serious and caring side, spending time with his son and trying to take responsibility as king. Then in episode 2, he's full of rage and rash decision making and coming across as incompetent. Now in episode 3, we seem to have reverted back to Aegon's season 1 characterization, especially with the bullying of his brother. It really seems that each of the 3 writers this season so far had their own idea of Aegon's character and what they wanted to do with him. There seems to be very little consistency from episode to episode. But what concerns me most about this is the bullying in the episode is really starting to fuel my suspicions that what happens at Rook's Rest with Aegon being burned in the crossfire in the dragon fight is not going to be an accident in the show, and Aemond may intentionally harm his brother. I also have a feeling they are laying the groundwork for the Moon of Madness already, and I suspect the brothel Madam Sylvie is going to be one of the instigators of the Gaiman Pelhurst storyline, which you'll have to wait and see. Now at first, I thought the dragon attack scene with Baelor chasing Cole and Gwayne was a little pointless, but then the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to me as a way of setting up the plot twist at Rook's Rest, namely the idea of hiding the dragons and luring a dragon of the Blacks into a battle where they could then be ambushed from above by Aegon and Aemond. What I really liked about this scene is it shows Criston Cole as the competent knight and battle commander he's supposed to be, rather than a fool and an idiot the politics of King's Landing paints him to be. At the end of the day, there is a reason Criston Cole is one of the most renowned and legendary knights of the Kingsguard by the time in the main books. Despite his flaws, he played a key role in history and was a very good commander and warrior. I hope we get to see more of this side of Criston in the show. Daemon's dream while at Harrenhal is the kind of thing I've been looking forward to this season. I was low-key kind of disappointed we've had to wait this long for it. I'm really pleased the showrunners seem to be embracing the spooky, magical side of Harrenhal, and I hope we see a lot more of it this season. His vision of a young Rhaenyra, I think, was much more than just a way to have a Millie Alcock cameo. I think it really tells us a lot about Daemon and his relationship with Rhaenyra. She always seems to be cleaning up his messes, i.e. blood and cheese, and maybe, just maybe, he feels some sense of responsibility for it. More so, I think him dreaming of young Rhaenyra says a lot about how Daemon sees her, that he still sees her in some ways as the child he's trying to control, and not necessarily the woman and now queen she has become. Pairing this with his insecurities and wishing to be called Your Grace, I suspect if we have more dreams at Harrenhal this season involving Daemon, they will have a similar theme, of him being unable to truly let go of this idea of his own power. Now I love that when he woke up, he was at Harrenhal's weirwood tree. Something I noticed is the way the branches of the tree are angled, and it almost seems as if the tree itself is trying to reach out to the Isle of Faces. Then we get our first proper introduction to Alys Rivers, and from one line, I think we can very much tell they're going to be leaning into the witch aspect of her character a lot this season. She tells Daemon he will die at Harrenhal, and well, as book fans know, she's right. So maybe she's going to have some sort of foresight ability, perhaps linked to the old gods given her proximity to the Isle of Faces. I really cannot wait to see more of Alys, and for her to finally meet Aemond. I think Ewan Mitchell and Gal Rankin are going to be phenomenal to watch on screen together. The final scene of Alicent and Rhaenyra's secret meeting is for me interesting and laughably bad at the same time. The redeeming factor for me is it was great to see Olivia Cook and Emma Darcy on screen together again, and the whole thing was acted wonderfully. I get within the context of the show it might make more sense, and it's a huge but here. The whole concept and idea of this meeting was ridiculous for so many reasons, and it really tested my suspension of disbelief somewhat. I get what they were going for with it, being a last-ditch effort to try and prevent war, but fundamentally it was too late for that, by a mile. It was too late when Luke was killed by Aemond. It was too late when Blood and Cheese killed Jaehaerys. It was too late after the Burning Mill. Frankly, it was too late the moment Aegon was born. There is no road to peace at this point. Rhaenyra is never going to back down, especially after Luke's death, and Aegon, by now, certainly won't either. The whole Aegon's prophecy aspect of the meeting really irked me as well. Like it really had any bearing on the war at all? Yes, Alicent's misunderstanding of Viserys' last words led her to believing Aegon should be king, but without Alicent and her misunderstanding of the prophecy, Otto and the Small Council were always going to push Aegon's claim, with or without Alicent. Alicent now knowing it was a misunderstanding changes nothing. In fact, what frustrates me with this is that the show is seemingly boiling Aegon's claim to the throne down to Alicent's misunderstanding and is ignoring the legitimate basis for the argument for Aegon. Whether you support the Blacks or the Greens, both sides of the war have valid and legitimate reasons and claims to the throne. Both sides have grievances. Minimizing Aegon's claim down to Aegon's prophecy does nothing but diminish what made the Dance of the Dragons such an interesting war in the first place. Both sides are right for different reasons. I suppose I do like the idea of the prophecy in this context being used as motivation for Rhaenyra, but it frankly had nothing to do with Aegon's claim to the throne. I think this whole scene was invented for two reasons. Firstly, to give Rhaenyra the resolve now needed for her to see this conflict as a bloody war, and to sow tension now within the Greens, with Alicent doubting herself. I think if the writers wanted to do a scene like this, they shouldn't have skipped past the aftermath of Luke's death when there was still a slim possibility of working something out. Even then I think it was a bit pointless, as Rhaenyra was not going to back down after Luke's death. but I guess at this stage, Aegon's own resolve might not be as strong, given Jaehaerys hadn't really been killed and he wasn't showing that much desire to be king. In a way, I get what they were trying to do by having this meeting. It gets Alicent and Rhaenyra on screen together again, and it spells out for the audience that war is now inevitable, and Rhaenyra now accepts that. But I think for me, the whole prophecy angle muddies the water somewhat, and minimises the legitimate reasons Aegon has to claim the throne on an ideological level, which in truth is the real basis for the conflict in the first place. Episode 3 to me has highlighted the main issue I'm having so far with Season 2, the inconsistency in the writing from episode to episode. There was a lot I enjoyed this week, and like episode 1 and 2, one or two baffling moments that brought it all down slightly. Given we are now 3 episodes in, I have a theory this will be a running theme this season. Like my assessment at the start of this video, this is still better than the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones, but still not on par with the first few seasons. Like last week, I'd give this a solid 7 out of 10. I wish I could give it more, but for 1 or 2 really poor creative choices. So far, I much preferred the first 3 episodes of season 1, and I'm not really 100% sure why. I just feel that episode to episode, the writing was much more consistent. I'm waiting for the episode this season that's going to blow me away, and if anything's going to do that, it should be next week with Rook's Rest.